and welcome. Thanks for coming along to I think it's the 7th session. So before we do get started, please do take note of this URL that's on the screen. You can go there to see everything to do with the Us and Us Collective. You can get, there's free, for free fundraising website build offerings. There's free strategy consultant offerings. There's also all the slides and recaps of previous sessions there. So do take a note of fundraising.co/us-and-us-support. This is our 7th session, Maximising Volunteer Engagement. We've got, we've been very lucky to have a whole wide variety of experts to join us from the charity, tech, events and agencies sectors alike. We've had an incredible amount of value in these sessions so far, and I think that's only going to continue. We've got a brilliant session ahead of us. So thank you already to Shannon and Zara. To everyone who's joining us who hasn't been in one of our sessions yet, these sessions really do thrive on questions. So please take note of the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and please don't shy away from putting in your thoughts, even if it's just kind of not necessarily a fully formed question. Just get it in there and contribute to the conversation, because it really helps us kind of, even in terms of formulating the next couple of sessions. So we're really making sure we're giving you the best value and kind of helping provide during these times. If I could ask the panelists to introduce themselves, I'll start. So I'm Brendan, I'm the Marketing Director at Fundraising, and very happy to be here.
Thanks, Brendan. My name's Shannon and I'm the co-founder of Rosterify, volunteer engagement platform, but we'll get into that today.
And Zara Lawless, the CEO of the Mother's Day Classic Foundation in Australia. Also get into some detail. We've just come through the other side of a quickly commissioned virtual event.
And hi, I'm Emily Clayton. I'm the Marketing Director at Massive and part of the SMS Collective.
Awesome. All right, Shannon, I'm going to give you control.
Awesome.
It's
pretty dangerous, Brendan. Okay. All right. I'm now controlling Brendan Rogers' screen. There we go. Perfect. All right, fantastic. So, guys, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm presuming the majority of people joining are from charities from the UK, not-for-profits. So really today, we're lucky to be joined by Zara as well, given, I guess, the charity space, the experience Zara has been through with one of Australia's larger charitable fundraising events, having to move to virtual literally over the Mother's Day Classic weekend. And so we're going to get some great insights from Zara, but I really wanted to break today down because I guess I've seen a lot of broad strokes suggestions around the best way to manage volunteers, but and engage them during this time. But I really wanted to focus in on the two really different strains, and that is the here and now in terms of your volunteers can actively volunteer and relate to COVID in this situation, and the other being organisations that don't have the need to send physical volunteers out or have a reference to COVID at all, and what are the different strategies both situations can play out to ensure that your volunteers are engaged, because I think we all know that volunteers will never be more important than through the recovery of this. And so just a couple of learnings from organisations from around the world that we work with or that we've seen, and I think hopefully we'll provide some value there. We'll then jump into a Mother's Day Classic Foundation live example of what the guys went through in terms of a little bit about the event and how they moved to virtual, but also about how they're engaging their volunteers and the experience. I think that the guys have learned a lot from the last couple of weeks and months around how important their volunteers are. But Zara, I think how engaged your volunteers are and how connected they are to your organisation, I think was a really key one that I got out of the experience, I guess, as Rosterify as a platform. So yeah, Zara, thanks for joining us. And Zara, maybe just give us a very quick introduction of yourself and where you've come from and what the last couple of weeks have looked like for you.
Yes, so thanks Shannon. It's great to be here. It certainly has been a bit of a wild ride. I actually only joined the Mother's Day Classic in October last year, having come from a mix of both events and the not-for-profit background. Spent many years at the Grand Prix, Australian Grand Prix Corporation, and then many years in various not-for-profits, including Jamie Oliver's Ministry of Food. I've worked with Cancer Council, Victoria, and more recently with Vision Australia, blindness and low vision charity here in Australia. So starting in October, and a very new team as well across the board coming into the 2020 Mother's Day Classic. And in the normal course of things, the Mother's Day Classic would be 100 events on one day around Australia for up to 100,000 people. So, as people can imagine, in about mid-March, that took a very significant turn, and so we had to pivot the event really quickly. So, it's been quite an incredible journey, and just that process of continuing to engage our volunteers, our supporters, and we'll go into more of that later. But that pivot, we've learnt so much, and I think really, I think we'll come out of this a stronger, more impactful organisation because of the journey we've been on and the innovation that we've been able to achieve in such a short period of time. So look forward to sharing more a bit later on.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Zara. So if I just move down to the next slide. There we go. Sorry, a bit of a delay there. So basically, just a very quick summary of who we are as well at Rostify. For those that haven't heard of us or worked with us before, Rostify is a volunteer engagement platform, and we work with a lot of the largest events around the world, but also not-for-profits. In the UK, we work with Virgin Money, we work with the London Marathon, we did the Tour de Yorkshire last year, and now the City of London uses Rostify as their volunteer engagement platform that is the full end-to-end process from initial recruitment, screening, engagement, reward and recognition through to event time, check-in, check-out, reporting, certificates. So that's who we are as a business. And I guess what we've learned over our journey is probably the word engaging. A lot of people refer to volunteer management, where we really push the engagement side. And so that's what today will really be about, is how to stay engaged, because I've seen on different areas and different groups we're a part of, a lot of organizations just basically shutting up shop and just presuming that because there is no need to engage or use volunteers at the moment, then there's no point engaging with them. And I guess hopefully today that will come out the end with some suggestions on ways that you can proactively engage with your volunteers. So I guess the landscape is that volunteering has changed. So for us at Rostify, we have had about 80% of our clients around the world have either postponed or cancelled their events. And on our platform, we have I think we've got somewhere near 1 million volunteers on our platform. And so that number of volunteers that are no longer engaged is incredible. And so that's a massive point, obviously, and I think everyone in the audience today that would relate to. In Victoria, here in Australia, where I am, the statistic that came out just last week was 40% of all not-for-profit volunteering has ceased. And another one around the revenue side, which is obviously important, is that campaigns and charitable events are retaining 25 to 40% of their last year's revenue, which obviously affects the bottom line of all charities, which everyone's in dire straits in that sense. And I think the harsh fact of reality is that there'll be reduced headcounts in charities, meaning the reliance on innovation and engaged volunteers to help keep those charities heads above water and hopefully strive and thrive throughout the other side. And then I guess the summary of all of this situation is that never before has community spirit been so alive. And that has been the shining light through this COVID situation. But even here in Australia, I'm sure everyone on the news saw the bushfires that we're all affected by. And Zara, I mean, you're down here with me. The response from volunteers and fundraising was mind-blowing, and now it's sort of flowed into COVID. Would you agree with that sort of statement there?
Yeah, look, that was, I think at that point, certainly a lot of charitable organisations in Australia were thinking, what is the impact of such an extraordinary outpouring of, fundraising and volunteer effort? What impact is that going to have on charities? And that was a lot of the talk kind of going into February, March. And then for COVID to hit on top of that, it really was, it blew everybody away. But we've certainly seen that, there still is that spirit out there. I think it's people have been impacted, but they need people more than ever.
Yeah, big time. And I think, and I'm sure Brendan and Keith in particular can really refer to, is it donor fatigue and potentially volunteer fatigue, things that in Australia, that was certainly discussion points of going, people are giving a lot, and how proactive will they be to be still giving, especially when a lot of people are affected, a lot of people losing their jobs as well. So we can discuss a bit of that today too. So which camp do you fit in? And so the way I've tried to break it down quite simply is that your volunteers, you're actively involved with placing volunteers into healthcare, into Meals on Wheels, community outreach programs, or your volunteers such as event volunteers or tin rattlers, people shaking tins, trying to raise money, knocking on doors, and in-person fundraising. That right now that opportunity has ceased to exist to engage those volunteers. And so whichever one it is, I guess we've got a few points around some engagement techniques that what we're seeing from around the world for the different scenarios. So just next slide. All right, so a live example here in Australia. This is for the volunteers that can be used. And that was a Starlight Foundation, so a significant charity down here in Australia. And what they did really well was they interviewed their database. They understood what they did was, I think they've got a couple of thousand volunteers here, and they scheduled time for each and every single one of them to interview them and basically store details against their profiles. And that is understanding little things like, why are you with us? What are your skill sets? And what sort of roles and positions are you interested in volunteering with? And I think that last piece about what can we do to link opportunities that relate to you and why you're here is something that their feedback was that was quite extraordinary, because I think a lot of organizations treat volunteers with broad strokes, in particular when you need thousands of volunteers to fill positions. It's about almost getting towards a number compared to an individual. And so what their segmentation of their database started doing was going, well, these people are in it for a cause-based reason. So we want to link opportunities to these people exclusively, compared to blasting everyone with every opportunity that there is. So it's very easy for people to drop out of newsletters, comms, if things aren't personalized. And what they've started to do is personalize their communications, but most importantly, the way they use their volunteer portal and in terms of linking opportunities that relate to why people are there in the first place. And it's awesome. We've had questions, the first question come through. So Emily, perfect. We'll get to that in time, Emily, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just let you know now, you might be coming onto this anyway, but the question is, when you discuss the best ways of enhancing volunteer engagement, what are the kind of one or two of the worst mistakes organizations can make in respect of that volunteer engagement?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's good. Well, I would say we'll address a couple of those as we go through this for sure, because we've seen a couple, and so that's fine. So maybe the next ones are in terms of Mother's Day Classic. Now, you guys obviously needed a couple of thousand volunteers for the big physical event. So you were sitting in the camp of going, well, we don't need volunteers for the traditional way we're going to use them. But what I noticed that you did really well was still engage with volunteers for positions they may not have traditionally done with you before because of a new need that popped up. Would love to get your take on how you engage with your volunteers there.
Yeah, look, as you say, we sort of fit into both camps because we did have this horde of event volunteers that would normally be at the physical events, you know, marshalling people, shaking cans, even organising it, cooking barbecues, doing all of those sort of things. But when we flipped to a virtual event, we did have this immediate need for some gaps. You know, we needed to create this whole virtual online experience, and we wanted to provide a whole lot of content that when people registered for our event, they got sort of fitness videos and workouts, and there were, some of them were live, some of them pre-recorded, you know, cooking, kids entertainment, a whole lot of things to engage people. So, and then also we needed to create that same sense that people got coming to our physical events in a social sense. So we needed a whole lot of extra resources in our social media team. And so but again, at the same time, you know, we had no budget because, you know, we didn't know the full impact of what we were facing. So we knew we needed to go out and be very specific about some areas that we needed to fill to switch to a virtual event. We needed a really, you know, really quick assistance, highly skilled people that could just jump in and get the job done as part of our team straight away. So yeah, we went out with some very specific requirements around that social, you know, web, digital, and even design, you know, a lot more design requirements because everything, you know, had to just be flipped. We also knew that there were a lot of people out there that, you know, unfortunately were out of work or had their hours had been reduced because of COVID. So we're looking to perhaps volunteer when they might not have otherwise had the time. So we went out with some really specific timeline and skills to say, this is, you know, the skills we need, the amount we think it's going to be required from here until Mother's Day. So again, for people that might not have otherwise thought of volunteering on a long-term basis, they weren't daunted by that. And we were overwhelmed. In fact, we almost had to just stop. I think at one stage, our general manager of fundraising and marketing, who was screening a lot of these, just said, "Oh, we've got some amazing skills out there." And I think the success of that, again, was being specific, specifying the time frame, and knowing that they would be, you know, really valuable. And in return, we made it very clear as well that we would be offering, you know, references and some experience that they might not otherwise, you know, be able to obtain because they were not just filling a space, they were really needed at that time.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing I learned from that and from a few other experiences we've been involved with is understanding your volunteer database is incredibly valuable compared to the broad strokes approach of going, well, we've got 5,000 of them and we just need them to fill roles. You've got some diamonds in there that can really help your organization. I think the one things you've probably learned from this is about going, your volunteers are with you for a reason. If they can help you more, then ask the question. Don't be afraid to say, look, you've got skills, can we use them? Another example that I've seen recently is that a client that we work with, a small charity, did the same thing with their database search through. They found a HR director from a significant company, I won't mention where, and they were able to bring that HR director into their organization to understand, I guess, the rules around all of this furloughing and everything like that from a volunteer perspective that they would have never had themselves or could afford to do. So analyzing that data and not treating as broad strokes, I think, is something that I've learned from that experience. And one point there, the last one there, is going back to basics. So this is more about a lot of organizations still treat volunteers like, we need you guys, but I think the mindset is changing about going, the volunteers actually are with you for a reason as well. And it's as much for the volunteer too. So if there's a way, potentially your organization doesn't have a need to be physically volunteering at the moment, but could you align with a partner that has similar values to your organization and to get those volunteers active because they're with you to help the community? And so by analyzing our data to ask some questions about, are you wanting to be active at the moment? Sorry, we can't help you, but hey, here's a partner that can. And a good example in the US, the California Volunteers as a government kind of organization, just linking organizations together. And we're also seeing that a lot with a lot of pro NFL teams in America, being able to link volunteers to community partners that share the same values. So it's a trusted link partner and still being able to get out and volunteer. So I think that's another key learning that we've had. And to one point about that question earlier about some things that we've seen or some learnings about engaging volunteers, to that point about maybe your organization doesn't have a need to be sending volunteers out. We've seen it where a lot of organizations like, well, we just got to help, so we're going to send all our volunteers down. So in the bushfires here in Australia, some organizations were just sending their volunteers out in trucks to do whatever they could. All they were doing is blocking up the roads and blocking services to get to where they could actually help. So it's almost a bit about staying in your lane, knowing what you're good at. And Zara, you'll talk about it shortly, about sticking to the core about what your organization is. So that's one thing. Although the intention is great, it's also about going, what are we good at as an organization? Because that situation that was creating headlines in Australia, that impact, and it was from organizations not really understanding their fit, and it was only a negative impact for their volunteers and for the end result for what they were trying to help. I'm not sure if you saw that as well, Zara, here in Australia.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. They're coming back to core is, in times of a crisis, it's not time to be something that you're not. It's time certainly to innovate and do things differently, but it has to be more than ever connected to what you're good at and what your core and what people expect from you in that sense.
Yep. Yeah, big time. All right, so now I guess some strategies for organizations that can't be sending their volunteers out now. So what can you be using this time to do? The first one there is about recruiting for long term. So Keith was actually the one that suggested about Pancreatic Cancer UK has increased their database size over this time. And I guess there's an opportunity here and potentially a risk that if you're not engaging, your volunteers will become disengaged and potentially drop off. So I guess what we don't want people to be doing is not communicating at all, and then in 6 months' time going back to your volunteers going, hey guys, we need you again, and the open rates of your comms being very slim, because in that time they're probably aligning themselves to charities that are communicating and engaging with them. And I think Zara, you'll talk next to National Gallery of Victoria about how they've still used those strategies to engage not just their volunteers, but their whole audience as well. But before that, I just had a very quick reference of a company we're involved with here in Australia, which is Event Workforce Group, that's used this time to really engage with youth. So I think we're heavily involved with mass participation here in Australia for volunteers. And a lot of the thoughts and conversations have been, well, a lot of our volunteers are older, which is understandable. And the initial feedback they're getting from those older demographics is, well, we probably won't come back until there's a cure, or there's or regulations that will definitely make sure that I'm safe, which is understandable. And so I've sensed the reaction is, well, we will just reduce our volunteer requirements and numbers then because of the fact that we won't have enough numbers. Where I guess we potentially would challenge that about going, well, use this time now to engage potentially a different audience of volunteers. And I think what we hear from a lot of charities is that they'd love to engage younger people in terms of bringing them into your organization. And one thing that we've learned from that, from the last 10 years really of working with university students, is about flipping the story and the narrative as to almost what are you going to provide them? What's the benefit of them coming to you, and making sure that the draw card is strong enough for them to come to your organization and they're being rewarded for their time as well. And that you link to the reason that they're passionate about. And I think that goes back to the Starlight example earlier about understanding your database. So I think that this time to potentially engage with a new audience of volunteers could be really quite helpful. Zara, maybe for you on the National Gallery of Victoria and what you've seen there.
Yeah, this was an example here in Australia that I was just so impressed with. They were just so quick as well. As soon as everywhere was shutting, and a fantastic gallery that we're lucky to have here in Victoria had to close its doors very quickly, as so many organisations did. But they came out straight away with regular engaging posts to continue sharing art, to continue sharing design. From their volunteer perspective, they have a huge number of volunteers that would normally be showing people around the gallery, they're highly engaged. And they would just really made sure they stayed front and centre, sharing materials and online activities. But I think for them as well, it was the pace with which they did it to just get straight out there, and have been really engaging posts to keep themselves relevant. And I think another thing to remember is, at this time where people are wanting to do things and there's so many causes, volunteers, obviously it's wonderful if they can be providing their services elsewhere, but when you need to re-engage that core, you want to bring them back. So you've got to stay front and centre. You've got to remind them why they have volunteered and what their connection is with you in the first place. And I thought, the NGV did that really well. And I continue to get a lot from their, they very regular emails and correspondence, but because there's real content in it, and it's providing beautiful stories and beautiful art and beautiful design and activities that my kids have been doing. It's just they've remained front and centre, which I thought was excellent.
Yeah, for sure. And again, if we answer one of those questions from before, one of the things not to do is by not engaging, and just simply turning systems off, which we've seen organisations do. That is definitely number 2 of what you wouldn't be doing at the moment. Just an important point on what I was talking about before with engaging youth. I understand that the pushback sometimes it comes with that in terms of going, the kids are lazy these days, whatever it is. But I think as well, we got to look at the scenario that it is in terms of a large proportion of the workforce that is now furloughed or not working is in that younger age group. And not, when I say younger, I'm not necessarily just talking about teenagers. It can be people in their 20s and 30s that have genuine skills that would add value to your organization. And thinking about them as more than just the physical volunteers rattling tins, thinking about them like Zara and the team did about what skills do they have that we do not. So what's the gap that they might be able to fill? And I think that's a really important one. And my last point on engaging youth is just systems. You've got to give them a great experience. Young people are not going to stick around if they're signing up for something and then maybe getting a BCC email 3 weeks later to say, thanks for signing up, we'll be in touch with you. Because that's the reality. That's what a lot of people are doing. And then when people put it back on the volunteers saying, oh, they're not loyal, they're not sticking around, think about what you're doing to engage with those people immediately and make this the best experience possible for them, because the world's changing in terms of engagement. It's got to be short and sharp, and you've got to add value instantly, otherwise someone will go. And I think from fundraising perspective, but also people need to be thinking of volunteers as if they were participants or if they were fundraising partners, because the value they bring is equivalent in our opinion, and we're a bit biased. So the last point there is around innovation. So Miami Dolphins NFL team, I know it's not from the charity world, but one thing we've done with them over this period is, while they're not actively volunteering, is implementing a reward and recognition technology that they will be implementing very strongly moving forward. And I think it's just about using that time to go, what can we do? And that's what this next slide is about productive planning. So just a couple of key suggestions on maybe some areas that you can focus on. Number 1 is automation. So I'm not sure from the audience here who knows of the conference South by Southwest in America, one of the largest tech conferences in the world, thousands of volunteers, humongous program. The reality is for their organization is that their headcount got slashed drastically. So I think for them, they need to automate as many processes as possible, where it was previously a manual process for someone to be looking at emails, tracking the list, tracking the spreadsheets, exporting data. How do you automate as many of those steps as possible? And in particular, how do you automate your recruitment steps so that by the time people are coming back, you have a qualified shortlist of volunteers that you can engage with that have had communications going automatically, compared to relying on a volunteer manager manually grabbing data from spreadsheets and sending it to make sure that they are engaged. With that last step comes opportunity to miss gaps or miss emails, and that's where the things can fall through the cracks. The next one is around training and inclusion. So Spark Event Group is an events company in Australia. They are building online training modules for volunteers through this period. There's lots of platforms around that can do that for free and also paid as well, of course. So they're using this downtime to invest in training and education that they're sharing with their volunteers. And that's a big point of engagement too. So it's not just about the education they're getting from that training, but it also shows you how engaged your volunteers are by tracking the open rates, the completion rates, the questions you're getting from it. It's providing value to your volunteers because, again, they're with you for a reason. If you can provide value or training or education on top of that, then you're giving back to them, which is just as important as them giving to you. And the last point for Spark Event Group was around inclusion. And this is something I really liked about their approach, was going, how do we use this downtime to think about minority groups potentially that haven't been able to volunteer in the past, people with disabilities, physical disabilities in particular for these guys, creating plans that can involve these people in terms of their recruitment moving forward, and almost just trying to make a stand in setting numbers or a minimum number they'll have on shifts, these sorts of things. And I thought it was a bit left field, but a really genuine intention and something that you can use this time to see what you can do to make a difference. And the last one there is that reward and recognition. So for those that aren't aware of what reward and recognition is, and just the way that we define it is about attaching points to shifts to incentivize people applying more. And it also creates a leaderboard of people that are doing really well. So again, you can highlight the great work your volunteers are doing. And then in the back end, being able to transact for the amount of points people are earning, transact for digital or physical assets. In an event perspective, that's often a hat or a pin or something, a memento. But I guess what we're moving more and more to is digital assets. So how do you link in with sponsors or other partners that you may have to incentivize your volunteers? Because I feel really strongly about the point of your volunteers are just as valuable as your fundraising partners and also of your participants. So if you can invest back in that volunteer program, I think if people, and like most of the people that have joined this call would probably know this better than I would in terms of the value that the volunteers bring. And without them, what you'd be doing with paid staff, and would you even be able to exist? I think if you can invest back into reward and recognition and incentives for your volunteers, it's only going to create a stronger culture of high performance as well, but also of wanting to stick around because they feel appreciated. So I don't know if before we jump into Zara's case study of Mother's Day Classic, if there were any questions, please feel free to shoot them through as we go. But otherwise, I'll just shoot straight to Zara and a bit of a walkthrough for Mother's Day Classic example.
Thanks, Shannon. Look, just a little bit again about Mother's Day Classic, for those particularly in the UK that might not have come across it. But in the normal course of things, as I mentioned, we've been running for 22 years, and for 22 years it's a fun run and walk that started initially in one location, but over that time has grown. And in the normal course of things, we would be on one day, Mother's Day, running up to 100 events all over the country, large and small, our largest in Melbourne for around 25,000 people, down to some of our smaller regional events. There's one that starts and finishes with 50 people at the local pub, all powered by an extraordinary network of volunteers, committees that operate in each capital city running our major events, down to single person event hosts in some of our regional areas. So normally we'd have up to 100,000 people taking part all over the country, and all of our funds raised go to the National Breast Cancer Foundation for research into breast cancer. And over the 22 years, we have raised in excess of 37 million for breast cancer research.
Amazing.
So COVID-19 presented a bit of a challenge, and we were, like many events, watching as the events unfolded. But we knew, to be honest, that cancellation was never an option, because we are more than a fun run. We're more than a breast cancer fundraiser. We exist also to celebrate the lives of those that have been touched by breast cancer. And so many of our volunteers and participants, you know, some people come for just a fun day out for Mother's Day, but so many people come to either, you know, remember a loved one that they've lost, to celebrate the journey. You know, often they have either going through treatment or have been through treatment, and they've gathered their family and friends to all use this and come together on one day to celebrate and remember what they've been through, knowing that they do so with literally thousands of other people throughout Australia. And we knew that that was still so important, probably even more so than ever. So we really had to go back and look at what was at our core, and knowing that was that celebration and that you know, bringing people together, keeping them connected, keeping them active was at our core. And so we thought, well, we can do all of that in a virtual sense. So it really was a process of, you know, the bans on mass gatherings were announced, and within 48 hours we launched our virtual event, because we just did not want there to be a gap. We had to come out with certainty. So many people were relying on our event, you know, looking at even how our volunteers fit into that core as well, what motivates them and why they're there. We knew that we would still be able to rely on them in a different sense. The flip in 48 hours, of course, we didn't know everything we were going to be doing in that journey. I think we had sort of roughly 6 to 8 weeks to be able to deliver a virtual event, and many of my team have even confided in me since that they said we had no idea what you were talking about when you first said we're going virtual, but they all just jumped on board and yep, we'll be right. But I think at each point we didn't need to know exactly what we were doing, but we knew the vision of what we wanted to create, and we knew that we still wanted to bring the community together to celebrate those lives. We wanted to give people that same sense that when they stand at a mass participation event, knowing that they're not alone, that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. So, you know, we knew we wanted to create the vision. And we also knew that with a 22-year history, we want to be around for the next 22 years. And so there could not be a gap. We knew that all of those volunteers that had put so much work into our physical event still wanted to see something for their efforts come Mother's Day, and so we couldn't let all of that work go to waste. So, you know, we really had to define that vision, and coming back to our volunteers, it was then what are we asking of them? And we talked before about, you know, that difference between, do you have an immediate need? And we did have an immediate need for some of our for volunteering in those areas of design and web and social media. But at the same time, we had so many volunteers who were not going to, you know, show up and cook barbecues and, you know, do various entertainment or marshal the crowds on Mother's Day, but we still needed them. So we went out and we said, you know, told them what we wanted them to do, which was still, if they could, to register for the event. And that still involved a, you know, financial aspect. It was a $25 entry point for registration, but if they could, that was one way they could still show their support for the cause. In any event, to get on social and to share all of our messages and to help to create that community. And that was a form of volunteering this year, to get out within in their community and spread the word. And we provided a whole range of resources for them to share on social, event posters, so for them to be sort of our ambassadors and our you know, our reach all over Australia, because quite literally we did have volunteers in every part of Australia, and we knew we needed them to continue to promote the event throughout the community. So I think it was in defining that vision, we were also very clear that it wasn't just about getting through this year, but it was continuing, making sure that we would be around for a lot longer and having people, you know, engaged in the cause. We also knew, you know, a big part of what we did was we spent a lot of time, and there were a number of our team that just manned our administration inbox to deal with all of the questions and complaints, and to have a really personalised approach to that, because we had to take everybody on the journey. And although, you know, initially, because there were people that had already registered and there was confusion, you know, what did that mean going forward? But to make sure that our really engaged supporters could stay with us, you know, that whole time. So the focus on the North Star, I think this was a really important thing as well. Again, having that ultimate goal, because there were so many times we just looked and said, we're doing the best we can. We had to have the excellence over perfection mindset. There were certain things that you just can't achieve in that period of time. And, you know, we've really sort of learnt a lot that we didn't need to have all of the answers at every stage, and being really upfront about that. But we could sort of, we could get over each hurdle as we went along the journey. I think the embracing uncertainty, and this is not, you know, necessarily just from a volunteer perspective, but there's never been a time where, you know, the alternative of doing nothing was so catastrophic that I just found this energy within the team that we could try things, try new ideas, and everybody was so empowered by that. And creating our virtual event, and we had a real focus, as I said, was we had to explain that to people, what it was that we were seeking to achieve, even though we weren't entirely sure how we were going to be delivering it. But then we could just throw, you know, so much creativity at it. So with our virtual event, at the heart of it, we challenged people to walk or run 4 or 8K on or before Mother's Day. And then we provided them access to this exclusive virtual portal with a whole range of content. As I said, exercise videos, yoga, Pilates, you know, cooking, kids activities, health and wellness videos and tips. And this was something we'd never done before. And so we just, you know, we still staying at our core, but we changed into a completely different type of event. And just seeing the way the team were empowered by that. And so even our volunteers, in a sense as well, we had people that were providing us, some of our volunteers were out there sourcing content for us, you know, just doing things completely differently, and to see the way that they were empowered by that as well, that there was no idea that was sort of off the table. As long as it fitted into that vision and towards heading towards that North Star, we could look at it. And the big thing, you know, communicate. I think with all of our stakeholders, just continuing, you know, getting on the phone to all of our sponsors, all of our partners, all of our volunteers, just remaining front and centre, letting them know what we were doing, so that there was never sort of a vacuum. There was never an absence of information. If we didn't know the answer, obviously making that clear, but letting them know kind of the time frames in which we were going to get back to people. And then just being, as I've mentioned a number of times, being really clear on the ask, particularly with our volunteers, about what it was we were asking them to do, how we wanted them to continue to be engaged in the event, and what we wanted to do. And we just were overwhelmed by how broad our volunteer network is, the range of skills that they have, and how passionate they were about our event, and helped us really to create that same sense. And one of the things I've been really proud of, and so many people have said to me that took part in the Mother's Day Classic, is it really felt like an event. It felt like that we still had that same sense that people get when they come and stand at one of our events on Mother's Day to celebrate their experience with breast cancer. And part of that was through our volunteer networks, because they helped us to create that sense of community, create what it was that you know, brought everybody together. And you'd see people putting up posts on social media, and they'd be answered and commented from people all over the country. That was a really, really beautiful thing. So it's been quite a wild ride for everyone involved, but you know, it's certainly been something that our event will evolve for the better because of these things. There's aspects of our virtual event that we will take forward into all events going forward. And you know, that level of interaction, I think we hadn't appreciated how much people wanted to still engage in the lead up to Mother's Day, not just on that one day. You know, we'll take that forward. So just see there's a question that's come in as well. Sounds like a lot of volunteer support.
Volunteers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is around a lot of volunteer support has involved using volunteers of different creative skills. So is this a whole new audience of volunteers for you? And if so, how do you change your approach so that you can accommodate that in the future?
Yeah, look, I think it's, yes, there have been a lot of our volunteers with creative skills. I think part of it as well is one thing we found that's been beautiful about going through this virtual event experience is that our event really, we've realised, is the people's event, that we just kind of provide the platform and we hand it over to the people that so love our event and get engaged. And in a virtual sense, they've then created that and turned it into what they wanted it to be in their unique ways by sharing their stories, sharing how they were taking part in the event, where they were taking part, their photos, their connection with and their stories of being touched by breast cancer. So I think, yes, that creativity of handing part of our event over to the people that are involved in it and allowing them to let it evolve. They can upload their content and share that with others. I think that's certainly something that we'll take into the future as well.
Great, and I've just had another question, if that's okay. It's again, I think related to this. Have you had success with using volunteers as social media ambassadors who actually help recruit participants to the event?
Yeah, look, we have a large number of both sort of social media ambassadors and other, ambassadors that have been touched by breast cancer. We usually have, I think, around 50 people that and they'll be involved in different ways. Sometimes they may go out and do talks with, some of our sponsors or other groups that hear their story. We do have others that do traditional media and a lot that then post their stories through social media as well. So when we say they help recruit participants in that indirect way, yes, by sharing their story, sharing their link, their connection with breast cancer, their connections with the event, and encouraging others to get involved because of the important funds that our event raises through for the National Breast Cancer Foundation. So. And I think, again, it's, we provide sort of some of the tools, and we have a whole lot of social media tiles and things that people can share, and then handing that over to that volunteer group to let them flourish and to let it sort of evolve from there. So we're, again, providing the platform to bring those stories to life. So, yes, a lot of success in that respect. And I think that's what also creates that sense that it's an event that's owned by others. It's not just us.
Yep. And I think just like your beautiful background behind you, Zara.
Very pink. Yes.
Very pink. I need to get.
I know it's nearly a little bit too much. It also, the good thing about this background is that if one of the children decides to run through the background, you're not necessarily going to see them. They haven't so far, but you just never know.
Until they reach through the pink behind you.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's just sort of this hand grabbing me. So.
Yeah, very scary scenes. Well, and Emily, if I can just jump on the back of that question just very quickly. Today I was with the Managing Director of Spartan Race, Asia Pacific. And so Spartan Race and Tough Mudder, significant mass participation events involving mass charities as well. One thing that they do really well for their volunteer program is that they have the street team. So I spoke before about the reward and recognition. So that's about engaging your volunteers and sort of the incentives of potentially getting them to do more than general and to do a great job. But what they do then is they have a level up, which is a street team, and they have key responsibilities of, how many entries they can get or how many more volunteers they can recruit. Perhaps the Spartan street team are more focused on entries and growing the brand by going out to gyms and sort of promoting the event and coming along. But the Tough Mudder example, where we've worked with them for the last 5 years, one thing that I learned from them was they'd go out to random remote locations in the bush. So they would need local champions to go out there and recruit other volunteers on their behalf. And so one thing we did with them was about each volunteer would have their own sign-up links that they would be sharing on their Facebook running groups or whatever, so that they would be able to see how many volunteers that they'd actually recruited And then you could keep those volunteers together in a segmented group and put them all on the same obstacle or in the same corner, rattling tins, whatever it was, so that those volunteers got a good experience because they're all friends and they got to stay together. And that again relates not to the broad strokes approach about going, we just have 1,000 people, we'll just put them everywhere. How do you keep people together that have come together so that they can actually have a fun time as well with their friends? So there's probably two things that I've learned about that engagement of using your volunteers to help push social as well.
Great. And Shannon, do you have any thoughts on how you can kind of replicate that in a virtual world? So how can you keep kind of groups of volunteers doing something together?
Yeah, look, it's near on impossible, isn't it, in terms of getting people together for catching up, obviously. Some things that we have seen is about that engagement and interviewing your volunteers with Starlight. So they would find some gems and diamonds like I referenced, and they'd build some case studies about them and share them with their audience, sort of highlighting. And it makes you proud of the group that you're in about going, this person's been with us for 15 years. They've done 850 hours worth of volunteering. And that created a sense of camaraderie between volunteers to go, wow, if people are willing to do that, then I can at least do this. And that brought people together and started group conversations. There's different ways to create those conversations. A lot of the time it ends up in Facebook groups, which serves its purpose. So the way I've seen that being driven from organizations is the organizations proactively profiling their volunteers, because that volunteer gets a real kick out of that story. And it also creates a sense of aspiration, if you will, for other volunteers too. So that's something that I've seen.
Great, thank you. And Zara, sorry, I've just got another question in for you as well. This is from Beth. Thank you, Beth. She asks, with the virtual portal that you talked about, was the content given over weeks or on an ongoing basis, or was it just provided on the day of the event?
Yeah, so we had both. We had our virtual portal was, as soon as we launched, we just started getting content up there as it came in, and there was sort of a bit of a rush from us to try and start getting a whole lot of content, and kids craft, the exercise videos, all of that went up really quite quickly. And that's been open and will continue actually to be open. Our fundraising remains open until the 30th of June, and we know people are still in lockdown mode, and there's just a whole lot of incredible content on there for people to utilise. We wanted to be sort of a one-stop shop, providing a whole lot of curated material to keep people engaged, active and entertained during this time. So that remained open the whole time, also had sort of sponsor content as well. Then we also did on the day, again, trying to create that same sense that people get when they go to one of our events and feeling connected, in addition to putting the challenge out to them to walk or run 4 or 8K, and to share on social and to also log their Ks. That was all done actually through fundraising. People were able to log and track their Ks on the fundraising site, and that hosted a whole lot of our virtual content too. But then on the day, we also did a whole lot of Facebook Live sessions. So we started with a welcome to country, our live warm-up session that people could join. We also partnered with another charitable organisation in Australia, Vision Australia Radio, a community radio station, and we did a 2.5-hour live broadcast. And then we had kids dance, again, live through Facebook, kids dance sessions, and a whole lot of a warm down and some mindfulness on the day. So there was both the before and a live component that people could then engage with at their leisure throughout the day on Mother's Day.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Zara. Such a good insight and a very fresh recollection of your experience from going physical to virtual and how you can engage both your volunteers, but obviously your wider audience around Australia too. 100 locations for an event. It's a lot to turn into a virtual event. So you've done incredibly well. I'll just move slides now to I guess a bit of a wrap up in terms of some key points to hopefully take home. one, and Zara, please jump in here. One is consistency. So stick to what you're good at as an organisation and be consistent in your communications throughout this entire time. So build a structure early and stick to it. The next is around data grouping. So do a deep dive into your database, find those diamonds that you have. Even the thought of the interview process, if people don't, and when we say interview, it's less of a job interview, it's more about how can we help you and why are you here with us? Because the stories you'll get out of that will be incredible. And that helps to link back to point number one about your communication, to link in the stories about your volunteers. 3 is automations. So there's plenty of systems out there that can help automate those manual processes that I think we all know charities are pretty guilty of, in terms of having manual systems, spreadsheets, email, big bulk emails, volunteer manager leaving, the data going with them and not knowing who their volunteer database. How do you automate and centralize the way that you manage your volunteers? Because I think on the other side of this, volunteers will be crucial for organizations to get back to normal running operations. So you need to be engaging with them consistently, and that comes through automation. For all, maybe Zara, proactive planning, and I'll leave you for the last 2.
Yeah, look, I think, the proactive planning, while there was, little that could prepare many of us for what hit us all, in March, I think, we now, it's looking at a lot of those different, even as we go forward, we still don't know a lot of what we're heading into, but I think we can certainly plan knowing that the things we can do, coming back to our core, being really clear about what that is, being clear with our volunteer networks and other networks about where the gateways are when we're coming back to them, and dealing with the here and now, dealing with what we know, dealing with the when there's uncertainty, just getting back to basics and answering the things we can now. Clear communication, I think, also clear and early communication with all of the stakeholders. Be perfectly plain when you don't have the answers, but telling people when you'll be able to get those answers. And I think just as well that, and it comes with the communication, just engaging authentically. So many charities have just been turned upside down, and I think people understand that, and when you bring it back to basics and explain that to people as well, being authentic is just so important at the moment, and taking them on that journey has been. We've had a lot of success with that, of just letting them know what we do know, letting them know what we don't, and hoping they'll stick with us through it all.
Very good, Brendan, and maybe over to you.
Whilst we're just moving those slides on, I have just had a couple more questions come in. I think we're probably at questions now. Seamless. So the first one is, do you guys have any advice on how you can be thanking volunteers, especially when they've taken part in something like the Mother's Day Classic, without being able to put on kind of physical thanking events at the moment?
Yeah, look, we, obviously I've actually just spent a lot of my day today phoning a number of our volunteers across many facets of the organisation, and it's just been such a rewarding day, I have to say, because it's lovely hearing people's connections and stories, and also hearing what they got out of it, as Shannon kept referring to. It's not just, the benefit that they provided to us. I think I spoke to a number of people today that are in the midst of their breast cancer treatment, but were thanking me for the experience of being able to volunteer with the organisation, and that's just blown me away. So I think just actually taking the time to thank people, to phone them up, to do all of that. People know we can't get together, but just taking the time where you can. But we still do plan, and even though we're a Mother's Day Classic, I think the fact that we're watching very carefully on, when there will be some easing of restrictions, and we are at this stage hoping to bring people back together in October. We usually do a big celebration function in October, and we bring a whole lot of people together then. We probably won't be able to do that on the same scale we usually do, but we might do that all around the country because people haven't had their physical get-together time. And we'll use that as an opportunity as well, not just to engage, but possibly even run some other fundraising events around that. I'm kind of thinking late and long Mother's Day lunches for all those mothers that didn't get their usual Mother's Day lunches as they normally would. So I think it's just finding the right time to do that, but thanking them in other ways.
Great. And then one final, well, fairly quick question, which is, so I think certainly I've heard a lot about this here where volunteer managers or, just generally where charities are having quite a lot of staff furloughed at the moment, there's not necessarily the people there to be contacting volunteers. So what would be your kind of one piece of advice to charities about doing that at the moment?
I guess one thing that we've learnt about it is setting the clear structure early about consistent comms that will go out. For example, volunteers will be getting an email every Wednesday. If it means that you need to bring in volunteers to help you create some of that content or be the case study stories to write in, for example, help them create it for you. Write in why you volunteer with this organisation. So definitely understanding that you have a reduced headcount internally. All this situation does is allow you to be creative and allow you to take risks. And maybe that is empowering your volunteers to help create the content with you by talking about why they volunteer with you and why it's special and maybe how they can bring others into the fold for when it comes back. That'd be my suggestion. Zara, anything from you?
Yeah, look, probably a similar sort of thing, and it comes back, I guess, a similar point to some of that automation, and it is finding ways to, a slightly different sort of example. We had coming back to that, being flooded with a whole lot of questions and queries through our administration email address at the event, but they're not having a lot of the resources to go to that, even though that was a big priority for us. We saw a direct correlation between if we could be really clear on things through our social media posts, then that meant that the level of information obviously coming through and queries. So I guess just finding other ways to be clear and to put that message out there and manage those expectations to get out with a broader message, so that you're not going to have the head count to be dealing with a lot of those direct queries at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, that sounds like we've got, well, we're bang on the dot pretty much anyway. We're slightly overrun by 3 minutes, so I think we're doing well. Oh, that's actually, sorry, this should have updated. Let's quickly, there we go. Thank you guys so much. That was such a brilliant session, and it's so interesting as well to hear about how you've used Zara, how you've used volunteering to fill what to me sounds like quite an unusual gap in terms of kind of social ambassadors and creative solutions and that kind of thing. That's kind of, from a marketing perspective, that sounds quite unusual to me, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. And Shannon, it's been really, really interesting. Again, talking about engagement in terms of volunteering, I'm always thinking about engagement and kind of how you can activate people and that kind of thing. But from a volunteering mindset, it makes so much sense. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Well, yes, thank you. To everyone who's with us, all the attendees, thanks for joining. We've got a couple more upcoming sessions. We've got Lightful and Cancer Research talking on Tuesday about empowering supporters of social media. We've also got fundraising live sessions. If you're curious about how to do virtual fundraising and pivot your event to virtual, you can take a look at the platform that we're doing these things on. They're on Wednesdays, and all of that is available through the fundraising.co us and us support link that I showed you earlier. But that brings the session to an end. So thanks everyone. Please stay safe.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
And have a great day. Goodbye.
Fantastic. See you guys. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Cheers.